Hello and welcome to Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, where I discuss the future of this region blessed with hydrocarbon resources. Every week, we give time to reflecting on topics relevant to the development of the Niger-Delta and her people. This episode is no different. We're here once again to focus on how to take the region to a more promising future. Now, this program is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC SPDC, Total Energies Ajib Joint Venture, the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, headquartered in Port Harcourt. Many thanks for joining. I'm Adedayo Ibishaki. Our topic for this episode is: do humans have rights? As we observe Human Rights Day on December 10, it's an opportunity. As we observe Human Rights Day on December 10, it's an opportune moment to reflect on the fundamental principles that underpin our global society. Human Rights Day commemorates the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, a landmark document that proclaimed the inalienable rights which everyone is entitled to as a human being. In this episode, we will explore the philosophical, historical, and legal foundations of human rights. We'll discuss whether these rights are truly universal, or if they are, or they vary across different cultures and societies. We will also examine contemporary issues and debates surrounding human rights, and consider the role of government, international organizations, and individuals in upholding these rights. Join us as we engage. Join me as I engage an expert and share compelling stories and invite you, our audience, to ponder this critical question. Stay tuned for an enlightening and thought-provoking discussion. Again, today on Canvas, our topic is: do humans have rights? And my guest is Henry Ekine Esq. Henry Ekine is a legal practitioner of several years post-school experience. He has interest in human rights, women and children's rights, constitutional law, democracy, rule of law, good governance, sustainable development, as well as general litigation. He is the principal counsel at HP Ekine and Co. He is also the national legal advisor for the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights. Henry Ekine, hello, welcome to, or should I say, welcome again to Canvas and Niger-Delta Roundtable.
Oh, thank you, Dio. It's my pleasure to be here again.
Always a delight speaking with you, really.
I appreciate it.
On most or any matter, especially matters that concern the legal profession. You are such an embodiment of everything law, and your insights are quite profound.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I have no doubts that we will do justice, or you will do justice to this conversation. Um, let's start on this note. What are the philosophical arguments for the existence of human rights? How did it all come about?
Maybe historically, one would imagine there was a time that society and humans existed and related with one another as if there were no rules and no standards and there were no principles to, in a way, reflect the respect for each other or one another. So the philosophy behind the concept of human rights, or even expounding human right, is that human beings are created equal, and then that as equals, that human beings should be respected, and then respecting one another, each other, that we needed to set some standards. So that's basic fundamental conviction and thought that humans were created equals, and then to that extent, that whatever is the conviction of any individual as a single individual or as a group, because their group rights should be respected. And then to be able to get this actualized, it would mean that you needed to set certain standards and agree on certain principles to regulate the conduct of individuals and groups, to be able to respect the individuality of the other person, the dignity of the other person, or even the other group. That's basically the foundation of the concept of human rights, whether fundamental or other categories of human rights.
Now, so if we started out originally without these rights, without an acknowledgement of these rights, um, And now that we do have these rights, are they inherent then, or are they granted by government or society?
In the human rights discourse and movement, it's a submission that human rights are inalienable. They are in it. They are as soon as you're a human being, that you're inured, you have these rights as definitive component of a human being. So they are not given. They are not issued out by state. They are rather to be protected and guaranteed by state. So they exist by virtue of your existence as a human being, and particularly the human rights. So straight away, human rights are rights that are valuable for human beings, that human beings are entitled to these rights because they are human beings. They are inalienable. They are not to be taken away. They are rather to be protected and be guaranteed by states by way of some legislation or even some declarations, as we have already in the instruments, excuse me, that exist globally.
How have these human rights evolved throughout history?
Yes, beyond the far ages where, like I said, society was chaotic, and then groups and individuals exerted some level of force and mind to the extent that between you and me, Dio, if you felt that you're more powerful than I am, you can actually even take away my property. Recall that when we'll get deep in this discussion, we're going to be talking about probably some aspects of some kinds of these rights, including the right to own property. So if you thought that you are more powerful than I am, you would have taken my property. And then if I couldn't defend my property, of course, I'll just yield to your power. That stage of society, philosophers described it as being chaotic, brutish, life was short, and then, of course, it was nasty. So we began to think in the direction of having a sane society, a more peaceful, secured, and if you like, stable society. And then to get that, we needed to set some standards that will regulate the conduct and behaviors of people. So we got to the point where these standards, these thoughts began largely in the West. So you got in the United Kingdom today. What is United Kingdom today? You have the Magna Carta Act as far back as the 18th century. You found that to distinguish between the rights of citizens and people, and then a few individuals, let's say the king himself, and then led up to even the French Revolution that got to the point where people needed to express their rights. But fundamentally, in modern evolvement, of course, if like evolution of human rights, which is actually what the 10th of December stands as a landmark, is when the United Nations, of course, maybe even before 1948, when the world broke into war, the global war, that's the World War, the First World War, there was serious devastation and abuse of rights of citizens, including humanitarian laws and humanitarian rights. And of course, that wasn't enough. Shortly after the end of the First World War, the Second World War broke. And then it got to a point that it became only reasonable that we needed to set these standards. And so when the United Nations was founded after the end of the World War, the United Nations became a platform for state parties, that is, independent states across the world, to set the standards. So the United Nations General Assembly adopted an instrument that has become the forerunner of subsequent instruments and even legislations and constitutions of countries on the issue of human rights. So the United Nations General Assembly adopting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on the 10th of December 1948 has stood today to be the modern signpost of human rights. So it evolved from the principles that were enshrined in that declaration. So the global community made declarations in that instrument that have formed a standard for the regulation of relationship between individuals and groups and states. And then after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of course, other instruments, so many of them. But maybe let me quicken to say here, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights set a signpost, a standard that led to the declaration subsequent of several conventions and covenants, and of course, declarations and agreements among state parties, particularly in the area of human rights.
Now, since we're gone historical now, what other key historical events have shaped our modern understanding and perception of human rights?
A lot. Relationship between states and, of course, global differences, and even the interaction between parties and individuals showed that indeed, if we never had this approach to ensure that society was regulated and relationships were regulated, and then standards were set for dealings with people, that we're going to head perhaps to a more destructive and chaotic society. So when in France, like I stated earlier, in France, in Western Europe, and then of course in Eastern Asian countries, in Asia, the experiences in China were such that it became imperative that we needed to regulate the ways we even made our laws in countries, and then to be able to ensure that you do not, because you are a sovereign state or a sovereign nation, and then you relate with another in some oppressive and discriminatory manner, and of course, not recognizing the rights of those states. So there are a number of examples, there are a number of experiences that actually gave the impetus for the state parties, and of course, including the experiences in America, in the United States of America, with issue of colonization, and then of course the struggle for liberalization, or the struggle for independence, the struggle for liberation, if you like, and then those experiences actually laid the foundation for the evolution of human rights, really.
But we still have individuals and groups and countries acting in oppressive manners in their dealings with other individuals, groups, and countries. What then is the significance, if we still have this, what then would be or is the significance of the Declaration of Human Rights?
No, the beautiful thing is the Declaration of Human Rights has actually helped in reducing what those excesses would have been. But where we have those experiences, even still today, is rather a question of non enforcement of those already established standards. So it is not about the whether there was then any need for the Declaration of Human Rights or the significance of the human rights instruments. No, the significance is that, or the reason for those declarations were to set those standards to regulate behaviors. And indeed, they actually regulated behaviors. There is no argument amongst states and even groups and individuals that those enshrined rights are actually rights that individuals are entitled. But the human nature of oppressing the other person for some interest, perhaps, and then, of course, at that point, you would have known that you are violating an established standard. If we never had a standard, of course, you wouldn't have seen your behavior as antisocial. You wouldn't have seen your behavior as a violation of any established standard at all. So, having had the Human Rights Declaration and then those standards that are there, it also creates some check for institutions and committees that have been established by those institutions, or if you like, those agencies expected to enforce these human rights. There are committees that are established for that, so that they will be able to, on the basis of those declarations, check the behaviors of other states, I mean, countries in that regard, and even individuals. And sanctions are also even there, established in those instruments and laws that have actually been enacted in respective states pursuant to those international instruments.
Now, besides the declaration, you mentioned international instruments. We
Yeah.
have international treaties, we have
Yes,
conventions.
exactly.
Nigeria, for example, is signatory to a lot of these international treaties and conventions. Um, how do they protect human rights? I mean, a group of people or a bunch of people, maybe representing countries or different interests, sitting together and signing certain documents or attesting their signature to it and shaking hands afterwards, possibly, or taking group photographs. How does that protect human rights? Especially, once again, look at the Nigerian state. In spite of these treaties and conventions that we're signatory to, we have vast cases of rights abuses still in the Nigerian state, and of course, inclusive of the Niger-Delta. How do these international treaties help?
Like, apparently, if we never had these instruments, the situation would have been worse. But let me take a trajectory really. After the declaration of the United Nations General Assembly in December 10th, of 1948, that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that instrument, together with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, these three instruments, fundamental instruments, form what is referred to as International Bill of Rights. Now, state parties that are signatories to these instruments, these international instruments, have commitment and they are enjoined to return to their states and then enact laws and make constitutions that will contain these provisions. And it is to that extent that you have countries having their constitutions providing for the rights of citizens, not just to provide, but state parties have responsibility and duty in all of the international human rights instruments to protect the rights of citizens. So the question asked, how do these instruments protect the rights of citizens? These instruments provide for those entitlements, those guaranteed rights of citizens, and then, of course, provide for sanctions, or if you like, mechanisms for enforcement of those rights. Those rights are enforceable for the enforcement of those rights, and then enjoin state parties to ensure that those rights are protected is a positive responsibility and obligation of states. So take the Nigerian state, for instance. Nigeria is a signatory to these instruments, particularly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and that of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And then it was on that when we returned to Nigeria, we made in the Nigerian Constitution clear provisions under Chapter 4 of the Constitution for those fundamental human rights, invariably replicating the provisions in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and those two international covenants in the Nigerian Constitution. The third generation rights, that is the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, are also under Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, which guarantees, but of course, I would say it's unfortunate in the case of Nigeria that those rights under Chapter 2 are made not to be enforced by virtue of the provision of Section 6 of the Constitution, that the judiciary have been, in a way, stopped from entertaining matters seeking to bring redress with respect to violation of those provisions, the economic rights of citizens, the social rights of citizens, and the cultural rights of citizens. But there are nations, even in Africa, the Kenyan Constitution is a comparative example, where those economic, social, and cultural rights have been made justiciable, that you can take actions on them. So state parties returned, and that's how the Nigerian state returned. And in making the Nigerian Constitution, we have those provisions in the Nigerian Constitution. Beyond that, you have the African Union, that Nigeria is also a party, and then the African Charter of Human and People's Rights, which is also an offshoot of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nigeria is a signatory thereto. And then returning to Nigeria, by virtue of Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution, we enacted the law to adopt that African Charter of Human and People's Rights and domesticate it to become an instrument that's enforceable in Nigeria. So it is by virtue of the establishment of these constitutions and other legislations across countries that human rights have the opportunity to be protected. It is not so. I wouldn't pretend really not to know that across the countries, particularly in African states, that the violation of rights are disturbing. The rates of violation of human rights is really disturbing. Notwithstanding the existence of these instruments.
That takes me to my next question. I mean, you've said quite a bit about human rights, the Declaration of Human Rights, talked about treaties, conventions, and all of that, and these instruments and how they're justiciable, and even provisions of the Nigerian Constitution and all of that.
Yeah.
But are human rights truly, Henry, are they truly universal? Or are they based on cultural and societal norms? Because just as you were saying before the question, I had to come to that point. If you look at the Nigerian situation, it seems to be the norm that rights are abused and violated on a constant basis, even by state actors whose business it should be ideally to protect and safeguard and guarantee these rights. Are they universal, or does it depend on where you go?
No, there's been the argument on human rights, whether human rights are universal or relative. So there are two schools of thought. the universalists, and then the relativists. Now, the relativists have advanced the argument that you can't really speak about a universal human right, a global human right, the ideal of human rights, and that probably would be there may be relative differences in terms of culture, in terms of if you like political system and structure, and even geography. Now, but this argument, I'm afraid, hasn't really changed the position of the like universalism of human rights. The standards of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights isn't about how it's enforced or applied in a country, but that we have agreed that killing a human being, for instance, or violating the right to life of a citizen, of a human being, it is universally acceptable that human beings have the right to life. And that is why everywhere across the world, if a person is killed without justification, that person who killed another has violated a right. So whether it is in Far East in China, or it is in the West in Europe, or it is in Africa, in Nigeria, or in Kenya, anywhere, it is universal that the right to life inures to every citizen and should be protected and guaranteed by all citizens. So these fundamental rights have universal coloration. They are universally acceptable that they do exist everywhere. Now, the differentials is about how they probably are enforced and then the internal legislations of those countries. It is not an argument that those fundamental rights, assuming everywhere in the world, that if you are alleged to have committed an offense, that you have a right to be heard. It's universal. That you have a right to be presumed to be innocent is universal. That you have a right to life is universal. Is in the interpretation or the expansion of that interpretation that you may have some relativeness, where what means that right to life in Africa may be a bit different from what it means and the scope as to right to life in China. But generally, universally, it is agreed that these are standards of behavior and then relationship amongst and between people and groups. So I think the argument for universalism of human rights for me is stronger, and I'm an adherent of universalism of human rights, not relativism. Universalism in the sense that those established standards are indeed applicable everywhere in the world and should be applicable everywhere in the world. And that's truly even what it is. So, and again, whether societies are violating rights, it has become a violation because there is a regulation, because there is a standard that that conduct shouldn't be acceptable. That it would have been worse if we never had these regulations, these instruments, if we never had these acceptable standards. It would mean that killing another wouldn't have been an offense, wouldn't have been a violation of the right of a citizen, because you wouldn't have laid your hand on any instrument that had protected the right of a citizen to life, to the extent that if another was killed, you wouldn't have had any reference to enforcing the right of that citizen. So it is in the first instance an establishment of those rights before you talk about violation. The same thing about law. If there is a law that prohibits a behavior or some conduct, that citizens are violating that law doesn't justify the argument that that law shouldn't have been there at all. Or then what is the significance of the law? It is because the law exists prohibiting that conduct that that conduct becomes a negative conduct and then it's condemnable, and whoever indulges in that conduct will be punished.
What are the or some current human rights issues or concerns, challenges plaguing the Nigerian state at the moment? The more common ones.
Oh, enormous. In fact, unfortunately, in Nigerian state, virtually all of the guaranteed rights of citizens are rather in the negative in terms of the protection by state. I recall that I said earlier here that the Nigerian state has a responsibility, a positive responsibility to protect the rights of citizens guaranteed in those international instruments and in the Nigerian constitution and other legislations. But virtually all the right to life of citizens, which is Section 33 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the first in that chapter, has been violated with impunity by state actors, the worst. And then the right to dignity of human persons, Section 34. Of course, Nigerians are regularly being dehumanized and treated as if we are no humans or less humans by state agents more than even individuals. Then the right to fair hearing, right to liberty, So all of these rights, as enumerating now here, are actually enormously violated by Nigerian states, really, the Nigerian state parties, state actors. The right to freedom of expression, right to freedom of assembly, right to property. I dare give the examples in all of these. The right to life, there has been a number, of course, sometimes you can't even imagine what the statistics would be because there are a number of even incidences that are not recorded of state execution without justification, extrajudicial killings of Nigerians without justification, without explanation by state actors. You hear cases of accidental discharge of firearms by state actors, even brutal, deliberate shooting and killing of citizens. Communities have been invaded and then citizens shot, groups exterminated. The stories around OD, the stories around Baramatu, the stories around the very recent one in Delta State, and everywhere, they are replete. Zakibiam. Those are violations, clear violations of state, of rights of citizens. Or is it about the apparent abuse of rights of citizens to property? That is forceful acquisition of property of citizens and destruction and demolition. A few days ago, we were contending the issues about forceful eviction of residents of some parts of the Federal Capital Territory in Abuja. And across the state, we have had those experiences. And then almost an arbitrary action of state by destroying the property of citizens as against the procedure for that kind of action by rule of law. So those rights of citizens have been violated. The right of citizens to fair hearing. There are Nigerians that have been denied fair hearing. The worst is even liberty. There are Nigerians that are in custody of state agents, and even when the courts had pronounced and granting them what generally will be bail for their liberty, and then even if it is temporary, the ideal situation would be that a criminal suspect has a right to bail, a right to liberty. You grant this criminal suspect liberty, he could continue to stand his trial, but the Nigerian state will rather keep you in custody without justification, far beyond even the provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and other international instruments. These are clear violations of rights of citizens. I haven't even gone into the social, economic, and cultural rights of citizens under Chapter 2, because unfortunately and deliberately so in the Nigerian state, they are made non-justiciable. But otherwise, the environmental right of citizens, the right to education, the right to a clean environment, the right to health, the right to economic resources, that is to harness economic resources, and then even the right of citizens to employment, the right to housing, the right to development, the right to clean water, right to clean environment. These are rights under Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution. But unfortunately, like I said, excuse me, under Section 6 of the Constitution, Nigeria has deliberately jettisoned these rights just so that citizens will not go to court to enforce these rights. Because they know, maybe the political class were conscious deliberately that we are going to deny Nigerians these very existential rights. As a matter of fact, the rights under Chapter 2 are really the existential rights before we even get to the rights under Chapter 4 of the Constitution. So the case in Nigeria is rather one of too many rights of citizens violated, or virtually all the rights have been violated.
It is Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. My guest is legal practitioner Henry Ekine. We're discussing, do humans have rights? Well, the conversation is anything to go by thus far. The answer is an emphatic yes. However, are these rights universal? To what extent are they universal? Is there relativity to it? These are another matters we're discussing. But we go for a break now. We will return in a moment. The conversation will continue. Do please stay with us.
Our yellow and black markers indicate pipeline and flow line right-of-way boundaries. Your activity could impact on the buried high-pressure hydrocarbon pipelines and flow lines, leading to possible leaks and explosion. Please keep off. Do not engage in sand mining or any form of excavation, pipeline vandalism, oil theft, and bush burning within pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Do not farm, trade, or locate any business on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. It is against the law to apportion land, sell, or build on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Maintain a setback distance of at least 30 meters or about 100 feet from the right-of-way boundaries always. We care for your safety and that of the environment.
This message is brought to you by the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, SPDC, operator of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, Total Energies, and Ajib Joint Venture.
Welcome back. It is Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable. I'm Di. The program is brought to you by SPDC in commemoration of World Human Rights Day. We're discussing, do humans have rights? My guest is Henry Ekine. Henry, welcome again.
Yeah, thank you, Dayo.
And thank you for joining us. Henry, let's localize the conversation somewhat now.
Yes.
Here within the Niger-Delta, can you give an example of human rights violations that, you being a lawyer, I'm sure you've had to deal with, litigate some of these matters in court. What are some of the examples of human rights violations that we are prone to within the Niger-Delta region, and what efforts are there to address them?
I think the most fundamental that's maybe peculiar, not exclusively though, to the Niger-Delta will be environmental rights. All the other rights, though, and also citizens and residents in the Niger-Delta, all of the fundamental rights under Chapter 4, and then those economic and socio-cultural rights under Chapter 2. But fundamentally, the environmental rights of Niger-Deltans as a group, as states, as people, and then as individuals, the right to clean environment, the right to life, because the explanation of the right to life has been expanded to include the right to a clean environment, and then the right to access to healthcare, and then, of course, the right to access to water, access to even food, and basic existential needs. So, but fundamentally, the right to environment, a clean environment in the Niger Delta is a fundamental one. And the reality is that for basically and fundamentally, the exploration activities in the oil and gas sector has been a serious challenge in the Niger Delta, and has been the primary and most devastating in terms of the environment in the Niger Delta. And then the most devastating and threatening activity to the environment in the Niger Delta is oil and gas exploration, not much as the activities of economic activities of Niger Deltans themselves. Niger Deltans are predominantly fishermen and then farmers. So it's not by the farming activities of the Niger Delta that would have polluted the land. It's not by their fishing activities that would have polluted the waters. As a matter of fact, agriculture in the Niger Delta is not even much associated with fertilizer and chemical use in that regard, to even argue that that's part of the activity in farming that would have devastated or polluted the environment. So it's more of oil and gas. And across the Niger Delta communities and states, you would find pollution in water, pollution in the air, and pollution on the land, and fundamentally by oil and gas exploration activities. That's a fundamental one. And then that's also what is predominantly in the courts when it comes to group agitation for enforcement of fundamental rights. The case in Ogoni is a case in hand, and it's a global one, where the Ogoni people, in about arguably five local governments in Rivers State, have argued and then, of course, fought tenaciously to protect their environment, and then basically about oil and gas activities. Not just in Ogoni, including my community. In Kala Ogbogolo, in Nahoda West local government area, you find that we have had one of the biggest of oil spills in the 90s, and then there has been a proper remediation or cleanup. So even when I was growing up as a young man, I recall that I could go fishing with my father, and then sometimes when we returned, we could have fish to be able to sell, and then I could take that money, go to school, pay school fees, and then family household items, and that's it. You go farming, you harvest yam, potato, and all, but this time you hardly will experience those kind of harvest when you go fishing or farming. And the reality is about environmental degradation and devastation of Niger Delta communities and their land as a result of oil and gas activities predominantly.
As Niger Deltans, Have we in any way contributed to these violations of our rights?
Yes, apparently. We're, as citizens, the violators of rights could include individuals, groups, and entities. So, to some extent, individuals also have contributed, and that's also has been condemnation of some of the activities, illicit activities of some of our own. I mean, the Niger-Delta and ourselves. So, for some of us who have had cause to advocate the condemnation of certain activities, including, for instance, vandalism of oil and gas installation and other public facilities. It's criminal behavior. Apparently, that's the proper name to give to it. There is nothing like, put in quotes, go fire or whatever business. It's no business. It's criminality. It's pure criminality. When you conduct yourself in a destructive, in fact, destruction of facility or willful destruction is a crime. Vandalism is a crime. Is stealing also in it? Because when you deliberately, willfully vandalize some property of another, and then you willfully also take away what doesn't belong to you, the crude oil that's taken away from the pipelines don't belong to those who go to vandalize the pipeline. The crude oil doesn't belong to you. So you're willfully destroying some property. You are taking away, you're stealing something that doesn't belong to you. It's a criminal behavior, criminal conduct, apparently no other name to it, no other reference, except you want to just eulogize the experience, the reality. But that's largely, I think, is a contribution, apart from facility failure, really. That's a contribution of individuals and persons and communities in the Niger-Delta that we need to really speak in condemnation seriously about. But that does not take away also the responsibility of the owners, the polluter of the environment, those who actually have come. The technology to explore oil and gas is not local. It's not available to Niger-Deltans as individuals, not even to the local communities. There is nobody in my community in Kalabolo that knows how to explore oil and gas, or that even has the technology to get down beneath the earth to extract oil and gas. So somebody owns that facility. You have a responsibility to protect it, to probably even prevent any other person to have access to it. So there is a mix of a failure of all stakeholders in the oil and gas operations in Niger-Delta.
Talking about government, let's talk about government and upholding these rights. I know you touched on this somewhat earlier on, but if you could elaborate, what role do governments play in upholding human rights?
Government, states have responsibility to ensure that legislations are made to protect the rights of citizens. That's the first step you've got to take. And then when you legislate or make constitutions to guarantee and protect the rights of citizens, you take deliberate steps, positive steps to ensure that those rights are protected, that they are not violated. And state agents ideally are supposed to be on the side of citizens to ensure that other citizens don't violate the rights of others, that state agents don't violate the rights of others. Then the judicial system, the judiciary, which is an institution of government also, is there to ensure the enforcement of the rights of citizens when they are violated. And that's why Section 46 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is to the effect that anybody, any citizen who feels that his right has been violated, is being violated, or is likely to be violated should approach the courts and employ the provisions in the Fundamental Rights Enforcement Procedure Rules. And the high courts, whether it's the Federal High Court or the State High Court, is vested with power, the jurisdiction to entertain those matters. And it's also expected, as provided in those rules, that in interpreting the provisions of our Constitution and our laws, it should be such that you interpret in protecting the rights. But what do we see? State actors violate the rights of citizens. The judiciary doesn't seem to be upright to be able to be firm in the protection of rights of citizens, even when fundamental matters come before the courts. By the provisions of the rules, Fundamental Rights Enforcement Procedure Rules, fundamental right actions are already seen to be urgent matters. And that's why the rules require that as you file a fundamental rights action, the window, the period within which the respondent is supposed to file his response is short. So it's expected that any judge who is sitting on a fundamental rights enforcement proceeding or action should see it as an urgent matter, and then should also interpret the law more to the protection of rights, no other discretion or leaning. So states has a responsibility apparently, and this responsibility is international, as in all of the universal international instruments on human rights vest the responsibility and obligation on states to protect the rights of citizens. The Nigerian Constitution, the same. And then even the institutions that have been established are institutions of state. You have the National Human Rights Commission in Nigeria, established principally to ensure that the rights provided in the Constitution are actually respected and provided. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights provides the committee the same as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in the United Nations system, you have institutions. The Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights is to ensure that states comply with the provisions of the international instruments and their laws. And that's why there has to be a rapporteur or some report from states to measure their compliance with the provisions of those international instruments and their own national and domestic laws with respect to the protection of rights. And these reports are usually evaluated from time to time to give an index, a perception of the respect to rights of citizens or otherwise across the countries in the world.
Speaking internationally, how do international organizations and NGOs, including the ones we have, indigenous and local, how do they contribute to the protection of human rights?
Yeah, they play significant roles in ensuring that rights of citizens are protected. And one of the veritable measures or ways to protecting rights of citizens is the enlightenment. It is believed in the human rights movement that enlightenment and human rights education play a significant role, maybe to a significant extent up to half the way, the measure or the path to ensuring the protection of rights of citizens. So international organizations, human rights organizations, including domestic organizations like the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, play significant roles continually to enlighten the citizens about human rights, to educate, provide human rights education. Even at the international level, the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and the United Nations, the focus has been on human rights education. Human rights education is a fundamental platform, or if you like, strategy and approach to addressing the issue of rights violation across the world. So we believe that as we educate citizens, enlighten citizens about their rights, the existence of these rights, and then the enforcement procedures of these rights, then you would have taken citizens away from the point of ignorance of the existence of these rights in the first instance to the point of knowing that these rights exist. And it's until they know that the rights exist and the rights that are inure to them that they will be conscious about when these rights are being violated or are likely to be violated. Then they approach the courts for enforcement. So, and then it's not all about just the enforcement in terms of approaching the courts, but also intervening in real situations of rights abuse, and particularly with the area of humanitarian intervention. International organizations and human rights organizations across the world, whether international or domestic, play significant roles in terms of humanitarian activities where rights of citizens have been violated. Don't forget that even deliberate displacement of citizens is a violation of their rights. Questions of immigration and displaced persons in societies are fundamental issues of human rights. Issues of housing and shelter are fundamental issues of human rights. So when citizens in certain countries are displaced, maybe by reason of war or even natural occurrences of disaster, the international organizations and human rights organizations play significant roles in at least intervening to protecting the rights of citizens to housing, to medicine, to healthcare, to clean environment, providing water. It's not all about just the judicial enforcement by way of ensuring that the laws are actually respected.
You've spoken to some extent as to how these rights are valued and perceived in the Nigerian space. However, are there differences in how these rights are valued and perceived in various cultures and countries?
Yes, indeed. The level of advancement of the country, that's a reality. And in terms of level of education too, will create the difference. And that's why if you move away from African countries, perhaps maybe Caribbean countries, and you go to the West, you begin to shift from a society, a tradition of violation of rights of citizens to a society or a culture and tradition of respect of rights of citizens. So the comparison is such that the realities in the society, the level of education, the strength, or if you like, the institutions, where you have strong institutions that are committed to ensuring that rights of citizens are protected and indeed enforced, then of course you would experience that there will be a lower rate of violation of rights of citizens. And you juxtapose that to countries in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, where the institutions are weak, where there is a high rate of illiteracy, there is, in fact, a disturbing level of ignorance of the rights of citizens or the existence of these rights even, then citizens, those who are, of course, are susceptible to these violations, are usually unfortunate. And then other citizens who don't care about the rights of other citizens will willingly violate the rights of citizens. And particularly in Nigeria, where politically exposed persons, state actors, violate the rights of other citizens deliberately with impunity, knowing even when they are violating those rights that indeed what they are doing are unlawful. Nigerian security agencies, knowing indeed that their actions and their operations are never anywhere near to internationally accepted standards and even the provisions of the laws that establish them, the Nigeria Police Act 2020 prohibits violation of rights of citizens, prohibits arrest by proxy, prohibits treating criminal suspects with some form of indignation, of course, if you like, torture. But you still find state actors actually with impunity torture citizens, criminal suspects, detain citizens, and refuse to even grant them bail. And of course, even where they want to attempt or purport or pretend to grant bail, and then they say you pay money, and that's demanding extraneous conditions for bail is another way, a roundabout way of denying a criminal suspect bail, and which is a violation of the right of that citizen to liberty. So apparently, the realities really are in society, and those factors enumerated, maybe the level of education. Apparently, societies where literacy level is high, the rate of violation of citizens, rights of citizens may be lower. The reality as well, on the other hand, societies where literacy level is low, and then citizens don't even have access to education, to human rights education, or are not even aware of the existence of. There are a number of Nigerians who do not know that they even have a right, for instance, to remain silent while in custody of any arresting authority and detaining authority. So if you arrest me today, and then you detain me in your facility, but in their usual practice, they will just come and bring some form for you, and they say, okay, write your statement. It's not by force. So we take time to educate Nigerians. Look, if you do not have what to say, it is your right to remain silent. But you coerce the criminal suspect. You must speak. You must do as if you're committing another offense. It's not true. But elsewhere, they're aware of this. You have a right for a legal practitioner of your choice to be present before you even make a statement. It's a right. It is enshrined in our laws. But rather, here, arresting and detaining authorities will even chase away your legal practitioner who has come to represent you.
Now, Henry, what are some emerging challenges and opportunities in the fight for human rights?
Opportunities exist, yes. Challenges, there are challenges. I think for me and the Nigerian experience, the challenges are more about the states not being prepared to enforce the rights of citizens. Citizens are always ready to enforce their rights, but the challenges are actually within the system. The legal frameworks may create some openings for even the violators of rights of citizens to continue to violate rights of citizens. So I think the legal framework would be a challenge, but the legal framework could also be a solution. Then the institutions, especially in the case of Nigeria, Nigerian institutions are challenges indeed to enforcing the fundamental rights of citizens. I've given an illustration here where a fundamental rights matter will be in court, and then a judge, knowing that the fundamental rights enforcement procedure rules, has actually made already automatically as you file a fundamental rights enforcement proceeding that is a matter of urgency. But you find Nigerian courts adjourning fundamental rights matters over and over, and then the fundamental rights matter being in court for years is a challenge. So the judicial system is a challenge. Then the criminal justice system is a challenge to the enforcement of fundamental rights, particularly the state agents, the arresting and detaining authorities. Then for Nigerians as individuals, literacy level, economic level. Maybe people who ordinarily would have enforced their fundamental rights, but are unable to do so because of financial challenges.
That takes us to individuals, and this may be my last question as we wrap up this discussion. While the state, no doubt, has a very huge role to play in protecting these rights, how can the individuals contribute to the promotion and protection of their own rights?
By forming groups and organizations, by deliberately accessing opportunities for human rights education, and those opportunities are available, and that's part of what you talked about, emerging opportunities. Really, there are a number of human rights organizations that provide support in terms of education and enlightenment on human rights, and even intervention for human rights enforcement, including pro bono services, are available. Not just the state established organization, the National Human Rights Commission, but private individuals could come together and then form such organizations. Then again, individuals, it is expected that where you are and then the right of another person is being violated, speak up and speak out. That's what we educate people. Speak out, speak up, stand for the rights of another person. Because by defending the right of another, you are inadvertently defending your right. And the same way another person will defend your right. So citizens and individuals also have roles to play, significant roles to play in the defense of the rights of citizens and the protection of rights of citizens. Condemn every action of states or any individual in violation of rights of citizens. So when society, you find citizens in a society compromising the violation of rights of another or even their own rights, then of course you're just making a fertile ground for those who are disposed to violating rights of citizens to continue to do so and then do so and go away. Especially in Nigeria, the level of condoning, of course, compromising even situations apparently that are in violation of rights of citizens is really disturbing. You find a situation where even as a lawyer, and then you want to insist to a pretrial detainee or someone who is in custody of any arresting and detaining authority that, look, you have your right to bail. Don't pay this money. But it's another relative that will come and say, I don't mind that lawyer. So I have also seen that it's really a problem, it's a challenge in the human rights movement in this country. The level of compromise by Nigerians to even the violation of their own rights. It's a problem.
Very quick response to this, please. Very quick. How does this affect the business space? The rights violations in Nigeria, how does it affect the business space in the country?
Yes. Security and peace have become direct results of respect for rights of citizens. So if you put it the other way, where there's apparent and repeated violation of rights of citizens, that society will not be secure. There won't be peace. So even security discourse have great concern and consideration for respect of human rights. So any security institution or agency that does not consider the respect of citizens, rights of citizens, of course, will not be able to be effective. So it affects businesses. It affects development. Violation of rights of citizens will affect development, will affect businesses, will affect a peaceful environment, and will challenge security, apparently.
That's a wrap on this edition of Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable. Do humans have rights is what we've discussed. The answer is emphatic. It's yes. Thanks for joining us, and especially thanks to my guest as well. Henry Ekine is a legal practitioner, rights activist. Henry, it's been a delight. Thank you for your time.
It's been a delight to be here again, and always my pleasure to be on the canvas.
I'm Adedayo Lushake. Do watch out for next episode across the various social media platforms. Endeavor to do all that you can within the confines of the law. Protect your rights. They are inalienable and they are universal.